You're listening to EFT Radio Online, where we explore meridian tapping techniques for self-help and peak performance. By listening to this audio, you agree to the disclaimer located at eftradio.online.com/disclaimer. If you'd like to get the schedule of all the upcoming EFT radio shows and access to archive shows, please visit us at eftradio.online.com, where you can subscribe to our free newsletter.
Are you a savvy, successful single looking to manifest your soulmate? Are you stuck repeating the same kind of unsatisfactory relationship over and over? What if you could stop struggling to find love and just be love so that your soulmate comes to you? Welcome to Manifest Your Soulmate with EFT, where you'll discover how to unleash the power of your mind to attract the love of your life. Your host is Dr. Annette Vaillancourt, author, master manifester, and the elite soulmate coach.
Hello, beloveds, and welcome to another episode of Manifest Your Soulmate with EFT. I'm Dr. Annette Vaillancourt, the elite soulmate coach. Well, you are in for a treat today, because our guest is Dr. Dawson Church. Many of you who are associated with EFT know him from his website, EFT Universe. But today we're going to be talking to Dawson about an upcoming online seminar he's offering called Tapping into Deep Intimacy. I had the good fortune of meeting Dawson last month, and as you may know, or you will hear later on in the program, Dawson has one of the most infectious laughs that you're ever going to hear. But aside from being a wonderful person with a great laugh, he's also a scientist, an author, and a consultant, well known in the world of EFT. Dawson Church is an award-winning author whose best-selling book, The Genie in Your Genes, has been hailed by reviewers as a breakthrough in our understanding of the link between emotions and genetics. He founded the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare to study and implement promising evidence-based psychological and medical techniques. His groundbreaking research has been published in prestigious scientific journals. He is the editor of Energy Psychology, Theory, Research, and Treatment, a peer-reviewed professional journal. He shares how to apply these breakthroughs to health and athletic performance through EFTUniverse.com, one of the largest alternative medicine sites on the World Wide Web. So you are in for a delightful surprise today, because at the end of the program, Dawson has a special discount on his Tapping into Intimacy program, exclusive to our listeners. So sit back and enjoy.
Here's what readers are saying about how to manifest your soulmate with EFT by Dr. Annette Vaillancourt, the elite soulmate coach. This amazingly powerful book speaks to the soul. Annette is relatable and really gets it on a level that is so reassuring and hopeful. She describes the tapping process better than any I've seen. The menus woven throughout the book are sheer genius, offering a customizable process that is sure to uncover and release any block holding you back. There's so much gold in this book, it goes way beyond manifesting your soulmate. It gives the reader the tools to manifest whatever it is they truly desire in their life. Marcy Traylor, Professional Empowerment Coach. Now available on Amazon.com or at EliteSoulmateCoaching.com.
I also wanted to announce that for a limited time only, you can get a free PDF of my entire book, How to Manifest Your Soulmate with EFT, relationship as a spiritual path. This is my gift to you for signing up to the Love Nest, my email newsletter, in which you will receive regular soulmate success tips. All you have to do to get your instant access to this book is go to my website, elitesoulmatecoaching.com, and enter your email, and you will get instant access to the entire book.
I want to welcome my guest, Dr. Dawson Church. Dawson, and it's great to have you on the program. I'm sure anything that we talk about is going to be of great interest to my listeners who are either trying to manifest their soulmate or keep their current soulmate relationship vital and growing. So welcome.
Well, if our conversation, and that is half as interesting as the one we were having before you hit record, then it'll be fantastic.
Okay, well, thanks. Well, one of the things that I find really fascinating is about the work that you do is that it's all backed up by research. So, there's a lot of myths out there about soulmates and relationships and intimacy, love, marriage, those sorts of things. So we're going to talk a little bit today about some of both the art and the science of keeping a relationship healthy, strong, and vital. How's that sound?
That sounds good. And you're right, there are many myths out there, and when you start looking at the science, it actually turns out that finding that person and keeping that person, if you know the science, is based on several really simple things. Of course, mastering those things can take a lifetime, but there's also a lot of misinformation available, and you can easily go off the wrong track. So I'm glad you're bringing it in at the start of the conversation.
Well, let's start at the beginning of the relationship phase, of the honeymoon phase. We all experience a lot of love, and life is bright and shiny, and colors are whatever at the peak of the initial honeymoon period. But what happens once that honeymoon phase is over? Why does it seem to fade? What's going on there?
Well, it's a very interesting cycle from a biological standpoint. When you meet a new person, all kinds of biological changes happen in your body. And these aren't the result of willpower. These aren't the result of decisions you make cognitively with your conscious mind. They're simply a result of your biology. And your biology is trying to do one thing, and that is bring you together to propagate species. Obviously, there was a book by Richard Dawkins in the 1980s called The Selfish Gene. And the concept was that genes want to replicate themselves, and every species wants to reproduce. So there's that incredibly strong biological urge to reproduce early on. And what that does is it masks all kinds of other things that might be problems in the relationship. So you find yourself incredibly attracted to your beloved. You're having sex all the time. They can do no wrong. They are fascinating to you. And the reason for this is because you have a huge surge in bonding hormones, especially oxytocin. Oxytocin is your main bonding hormone. It's generated in large amounts by mothers and babies, and they bond with this similar hormonal flood. So when you're with a new person, many different hormones change. But essentially your stress hormones go way down, and your bonding hormones and your feel-good hormones, your natural endorphins in your brain, go way up. Now, that's great, and you feel wonderful about this new person for a little while. But then Mother Nature also likes to see genetic experiments. It likes to see what possibilities will be thrown up by different combinations of genes. So once you've been together for 6 months or a year and a half at the most, and again, some people say it's a bit longer. My friend John Gray, who wrote Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus, thinks it is as long as 2 years. But that's the outer edge of the envelope. After 2 years, all of those biological imperatives change completely, and now Mother Nature wants you to move on and make babies with somebody else. So now your oxytocin levels crash. By comparison, your feel-good hormones aren't there. You're now seeing all the flaws in your partner, and you want to just move on and find someone new. So if all you're doing is being driven by, you look at personal ads, and people say, I'm looking for chemistry. And that's a very interesting word. they want chemistry. They want that rush of feel-good hormones, but they don't realize that that rush is just a tide. It washes in and it washes out somewhere between around the 12-month mark, and you then find yourself seeing all the flaws of your partner. So it's a biological cycle, and if you recognize it, if you notice the cycle, you can then do things to counteract it. And in fact, my wife and I are really, and we're talking to other couples as well, long-term couples, about how if you learn these cycles, how you can actually learn to what I call hack your hormones, where you keep those bonding hormones high over time, not just initially. But if all you're doing is trusting chemistry, looking for that soulmate based on chemistry, then you're at the mercy of these biological ebbs and flows, and they'll leave you high up stranded on the beach after a year or two looking for the next experience of that high. So that's the cycle most people are going through, and it's a really unsatisfying cycle because it does not lead to long-term connection.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because this is why I advocate to my clients for long engagements. And I even tell them, a maximum of 2 years or a minimum of 2 years to get through that initial infatuation cycle, and to have, to have those hormones come crashing down so they actually can start to develop a relationship based on something else.
Yeah, that's really good advice. 2 years, I think, is a good benchmark, and see if they can then develop a relationship. Because after 2 years, then skill comes into play. And it was funny, I was doing a workshop recently, one of my live EFT workshop, and my wife was there in the room as well, and I was talking about love versus skill, and I said that it's essential. Love is wonderful. Love will get you bonded initially, but after that 2-year mark, it's a matter of skill, how skillful you are at managing a relationship. If you've learned good relationship skills, if you have excellent abilities to communicate with your partner, to resolve your own stressors, taking personal responsibility, then your next 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 years can be fantastic as well. But at that point, it all depends on skill, not on love. Love is what gets us together. Skill is what keeps love alive. And I just remember looking at the sea of really kind of crestfallen faces, Annette, as I was giving this lecture about how the John Lennon song "All I Need Is Love," Beatles song, is one of my least favorite songs, because I'd rather it be all you need is skill. If you have skill, you can keep love alive, but if you just looking at love, like the Beatles, you'll break up in time. So they were all looking at my wife and saying, "Is it really as bleak as that?"
Sorry, Christina. Well, I will often hear couples say, "I love my husband or I love my wife, but I'm not in love with them anymore." So maybe this is what they're meaning by that, is they're not feeling that chemistry anymore.
I think I'd also use the quote by Virginia Satir. She's one of the people who founded the whole field of marriage and family therapy. She's regarded as the mother of that whole field. And she defined a marriage, Virginia Satir defined a marriage as 2 sets of dysfunctional family patterns looking to come together to propagate themselves to the next generation. And so she had this really, really bleak view of what a marriage was, and the thing she would try and do is help people overcome those dysfunctions. They didn't drag them forward and pass them along to their kids. We're now realizing with the field of epigenetics that even things like depression, we've now got research showing that they're passed along intergenerationally. So all kinds of fear, anxiety, depression, we're now realizing actually produce epigenetic tags on our genes that predispose us to having those things. So if we don't solve them in our own marriages, in our own circumstances, in our own lives, then we'll actually wind up predisposing our kids to have these things as well.
Yeah, I think Harpo Hendricks says something very similar in his imago therapy, where you either are attracted to the kind of person who's going to basically your dysfunction and their dysfunction are a great complement to each other, or you turn your partner into that dysfunctional person by the way you interact with them.
Yeah, one of the phrases they use is complementary dysfunctionalities. You have two people whose dysfunctionalities mesh enough to keep them both alive.
Yeah, I often describe it as that kind of thing of bringing your emotional baggage to the surface is both the bane and the boon of intimate relationships, because it brings it to the surface for the purpose of healing.
Well, I've been for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been developing really comprehensive online training program to train people to in those relationship skills. And you can relearn those habits. And what we train people to do in this course is we say, when those things come to the surface in a new relationship, you may say, oh no, here I go again. Here I pick the same person same kind of person as my previous dysfunctional relationship. And we may get really disappointed with ourselves, and it might seem like a real problem that we have these recurring themes in our lives and our relationships. But what we train people to do in that course is see those recurring problems not as yet another repetition of an old pattern, but it's bringing the old pattern up so you can heal it. If you bring it up, you can bring up that pattern and heal it. Like, my wife knows really well that one of my hot buttons is communication. I feel communication is really important. That if we aren't listening to each other and sharing with each other well, my emotional temperature rises. But again, I know this just because I wasn't really heard as a kid. So either you carry that into the current relationship and then insist on getting heard because you're trying to overcome your childhood deficits, or you recognize, hey, that's just an old leftover problem from when I was a year old, 2 years old, 5 years old, and I wasn't getting heard by my parents or by my classmates at school or my teachers. That's the real problem. And so when it surfaces with my wife now, I didn't make it about my wife. One of the phrases I use in the EFT manual is, the problem is never the problem. You look below the surface and you find the sources of the problem. It isn't always in childhood, Annette, but it's almost always in childhood. And so when it arises now in your marriage or in your relationship or in your aspirations for a soulmate, the person you want, your description of what the person will be like, when that arises there, you take this as an opportunity to heal those old patterns. And when you heal those old patterns, you then have choice. You then can choose to be how you want to be, and you aren't driven by them anymore. So it is so worth learning to reinterpret your current triggering and your current relationship issues and problems as a chance to heal your past.
Exactly, because most people, I did marriage counseling for 24 years. It's really hard work. And everybody thinks their partner's the problem. So I love what you said about the problem, not the problem. So
the problem is never the problem, yeah.
Do you have some stories that you could share about people who've used these methods that you've talked about? Can you tell us some of those?
Well, one of the most stunning ones, and I actually used this in the very first introduction of the course, because it was the first time I'd used EFT for a relationship issue ever, and this is going back more than 10 years. And it was just so, I mean, the goosebumps just thinking about the story right now. And I was doing a book tour for a book I had written, and I was at different bookstores. You know, there's things called bookstores. They used to be back in the olden days. And I had a big bookstore doing a big workshop with people, evening workshop. And there was a guy there who volunteered for an EFT tapping session with me up front in front of the whole group. So I said, "What's your issue? What's bothering you right now?" And he said, well, he told us a little bit about his story, his background, and he was a really nice human being. You could tell he was very compassionate. He was a meditator. He was a Buddhist. He'd been meditating a long time. And he and his wife had been in counseling, in marriage counseling, for 4 years. They'd been married 29 years, been counseling 4 years, and after 4 years of weekly therapy, he'd come to the conclusion that he wanted out, that he did not want to keep on going with the marriage. So his problem was he needed to now tell his wife that he'd reached the definitive conclusion that they needed to get divorced. And he didn't know how to tell his wife because he knew she'd be tremendously upset when he told her. So that was his problem, and we did some tapping. So again, ignoring the presenting problem and diving right back into his childhood, I said, what does this remind you of? And he said, well, it reminds me of an incident when I was 5 years old, and my brother and I were in the back seat of my parents' car, and we were fighting with each other. And my dad said, stop fighting. And we did stop fighting for a little while, but after a while we began to fight again. And he reached behind, turned around, swiveled in his seat, and he gave me a huge slap across the head. So I tapped with this guy on that incident of the slap. So again, picture the scene, Annette. Now we're in this bookstore. There's this big crowd. I'm doing this work with this guy up front, and he wants to leave his wife. That's his problem. And he now then goes back to his childhood, and we tap on his dad. And so there was a big drop in his emotional intensity. His emotional charge around his dad slapping him went from a high number to a low number. So he was close to 10 out of 10 around that to begin with. He was 0 out of 10 after doing EFT on that. Wow. So this big emotional release around his dad and his childhood. I then said to him, okay, now let's talk about you and your wife. And he said, well, my wife's basically a very decent person, and I have about 29 years invested in this relationship, and it's really time to give it another chance. Mm. And Annette, my jaw just about hit the floor with astonishment, as did the jaws of all the people in the room.
Wow.
So, this is one of my first experiences with EFT, and I was just astonished how it shifted things. Now, of course, we've had over 1,000 people go through our relationship skills program. We've seen the same thing happen many times with couples often who've been together for a long time, having huge shifts in their relationships. We've also seen single people who, like one woman said, I was just in despair about having a good relationship again. I was just running from them, and now I'm hopeful, and I've done so much work on me that I know how to approach a relationship realistically and differently. We've seen that same kind of scenario play out literally hundreds and hundreds of times.
Wow, great story. So do you and Christine, your wife, apply these skills to your marriage? Do you tap on things with each other?
We have a rule. If we have any kind of emotional charge around an issue, we start tapping before we start talking about the issue. The rule is always start tapping, then talk, and absolutely never talk, then tap. Because if you tap and you're emotionally triggered, you'll just generate new wounding and new emotional charge to go along with the old emotional charge. So we have this firm rule: start tapping, then start talking. And then guess what? All that emotional intensity, it just dissipates really fast, and it's over. So we still have things to work on, and we do. But we do that tapping and talking maybe 3-4 times a month. We have something to work on, and we'll tap and talk, and usually shift through it really, really fast. So that's one of the 12 essential skills we think are really the foundation of a good long-term marriage.
Tell me a little bit more for people who maybe are tuning into the show for the first time, exactly what EFT tapping is.
Sure. EFT is a very simple method, and it combines elements of some really good psychotherapy, conventional Western psychotherapy techniques like exposure therapy and cognitive therapy, combines those with the Oriental concept from traditional Chinese medicine of acupuncture. And so the traditional Chinese Oriental scheme believes there are energy flows that go through your body, and these are usually treated in acupuncture by putting in needles. With EFT, instead we tap or rub acupuncture points, and while you're doing that, while you're processing an emotional event, usually people's degree of triggering goes way, way, way down. So just like this guy was a 10 out of 10 thinking about his dad in the car, he was a 0 out of 10 after doing this. And talking about the event without tapping might have given him some relief, or it may have actually made it worse for him. But talking about the problem and tapping took all the emotional intensity and released it. We've even done research on cortisol. Cortisol is the main stress hormone. When you're stressed, when you're upset, when you're feeling bad, your cortisol levels rise. We find with EFT that your cortisol levels drop dramatically after tapping. So when you combine the tapping with the remembering the bad things that happened to you and the emotional charge behind them, that emotional charge goes away, even though the bad things still happen. The memory's still there, details are still there, but they're no longer just fraught with that emotional charge. And EFT is really effective for taking away that kind of emotional intensity you have around the bad things that happen in everyone's life.
Mm-hmm. I think you said when we were talking before that this literally can change your brain.
It does change your brain. There's now new research on traumatic stress showing that people who are stressed have really marked changes in the brain. And for example, in one study of veterans, the researchers took twins, identical twins, where one twin had served in combat in Vietnam and the other twin didn't serve in combat. So again, two identical twins, identical brains, identical genes to begin with. And they found that the brains of the twins who'd been exposed to the traumatic stress of combat had changed. And the regions responsible, for example, for memory and learning and executive functioning and cognition had actually shrunk in those twins relative to the twin that hadn't been in combat. And the brains of the twins that had been in combat had learned to do certain things better. But those things weren't healthy things. Those things were the ability to process stress. So those combat-exposed brains were on a hair trigger able to process stress. And some very recent research has compared the brains of veterans who have PTSD with the brains of children who've been exposed to trauma. And they find that very much the same kinds of neurological wiring changes happen in the brains of kids who've been exposed to trauma as happen in the brains of veterans who are exposed to combat. So whether your war was Afghanistan or Vietnam, or whether your war was mommy and daddy screaming and yelling and fighting with each other when you were 2 or 5 years old, very similar kinds of adverse changes happen in the brain.
Mm-hmm. Well, or your war was an abusive relationship and then the baggage that comes with it.
Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned your tapping into deep intimacy course. And as a psychologist, I know about attachment theory and those sorts of things. Is this something you incorporate into your program? And if so, how so?
Attachment theory is something we talk about at the very, very, very beginning of the course. We feel it's essential that people understand what their attachment style is. And just to recap, in Tapping Deep Intimacy, we have people take a little test initially to look at their attachment style and evaluate what it is, because we want them to know. And what researchers found, the attachment theory got its start after World War II, when there were large numbers of orphans. And as the newly formed United Nations was trying to take care of some of these kids, some of the professionals who were helping take care of them noticed that they had various difficulties. Then later research showed that if you had an ambivalent or avoidant attachment to your parent, you would tend to then carry that attachment style into your adult relationships. So, for example, if you had caregivers who were neglectful or absent, you would then tend to bring those kinds of qualities into your adult relationships. So people were trying to work on their marriages, not realizing that the roots of those behavior patterns were laid down decades before in their childhoods. And so that's why we always want to go back and look there for our issues and not make it about our partner. The moment you make it about your partner, you're projecting out onto somebody else, and you abort your opportunity to heal in the here and now. You need to claim your opportunity to heal in the here and now by not making it about your partner, by making it about you. It's really essential to do that. And attachment theory helps you learn to do that.
So it kind of creates this template for needs that either get met or not met as children, and then it shows up in our adult relationship.
Yes.
So can you give an example of how this might show up with a client when you're doing tapping with them?
Yeah, in the Tapping Deep Intimacy course, there's a very poignant story, actually, by another psychologist, David Feinstein, who we both know. And David is married to Donna Eden, and Donna and David wrote the book Energy Medicine. They've written several other books together. Their most recent book is called The Energies of Love. And David actually helped shape this course, but he talks about a time when he and Donna were in long-term conflict about something, and they were just having this repeated conflict. And he was convinced the problem was her, she was convinced the problem was him. But he knew that he had avoidant attachment. He knew that as a result of his early experiences. And he then went and looked at himself, and after thinking it was Donna for a while, he then said, what if it's me? So he looked back on his experience, and he realized, he remembered an event when there was a bully in his school, and one day he was alone at the bus stop with a bully, and the bully really scared the living daylights out of David, and he tapped on that, and suddenly the whole conflict with Donna just went away, and they were able to have a synthesis, which is the whole idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And that's a lot of what our marital relationships can be like. So we wind up having a synthesis of what we like. For example, my wife loves five-star hotel. She can tell the difference between a five-star hotel and a four-star hotel. Personally, when I travel, whether I'm in a youth hostel or a Motel 6, I didn't even notice it, as long as there's a bed there and running water. So what do? So what you need to do is find a synthesis, something where that honors the values of both. And if you both have emotional charge, you'll have conflict. Remove the emotional charge, and you have synthesis. You talk about this, and you find a place to go. So what we'll do, for example, is we'll talk about where we're going to stay. We'll look at different accommodations. And we'll find something that we both really enjoy. And when the emotional charge is removed from the discussion, suddenly you have two reasonable people able to achieve reasonable solutions. Add the emotional charge to it, though, and you have two people who may be reasonable at the best of times, but when their cortisol rises, when their adrenaline is way up there, their whole thinking brain goes offline. All you need isn't love. You need skill. And if you have the skill, you reverse the process. You bring your frontal lobes back online again. You're no longer having this big emotional charge. You then can make intelligent, wise, compassionate, caring connections with your partner and decisions together with them without that emotional charge interfering with your ability to relate and be successful. And you then build up a pattern over time. Do this for a week, do this for a month, do this for a year. You build up this pattern then of success. You have one success, then a number of successes, then a whole track record of success. And so you relax. You then know, gee, I realize I'm going to be able to navigate anything with my partner. I'm going to be able to solve any problem with them. And suddenly your relationship opens up to a huge amount of connection, happiness, and pleasure. So that's really the goal behind learning these skills, is to reverse that natural tendency to bring our conflicts from our childhood, from the past, into the present, and then to give us a chance to relate to each other in the now as we are today, and not crippled by the traumas of our past.
Yeah, I see this all the time when I'm teaching couples communication. I'll start them off with something where one's listening, using active listening skills, one's being really clear in their communication, and I'll start them off with issues that don't have a lot of intensity to it. And they'll be fine as they're learning the skills. I want to give them those baby steps of success so they start to build some confidence, as you say. But then as soon as the emotionality gets high, it's like their brain goes offline. and they get stupid. They've like forgotten all the skills that they learned early on. So I can see where even like you and your wife do, tapping while they're talking to keep that level of emotionality at a manageable level, so that they can continue to work towards a win-win solution.
Yeah. And the other compounding factor here is then they act in that counterproductive way, and then later on they have all this guilt and self-recrimination. How can I have been so stupid? How can I have said that stupid thing to my partner and cause such damage to our relationship? Why did I bring up that topic that I know is going to not work? And so, as well as the initial bad experience, we then have all the guilt at having acted in a way that's so counterproductive. And when we realize it's just biology, you're meant to act, you're meant to be wired that way. That was your primary survival skill 100,000 years ago. It then takes away all the guilt from around that behavior. You realize, I'm just acting that way because I'm programmed to act that way. It isn't really what I want to be, and I can change it. So it's powerful to learn these kinds of skills, because they then change the whole way you function and the story you make about why you act badly sometimes. It's not because we're bad people, not because we have poor willpower. It's because our brains are designed to function that way, and all that's happening is that our biology is working just the way it's meant to. So knowledge is power. When you have that knowledge, you then can learn those skills and not be like those couples you're describing, where when they're triggered, all of their learning goes out the window. That you can keep all your learning available to you to solve problems and to connect and have a juicy, loving, compassionate, kind relationship, and that keeps on going year after year after year.
Okay, when you can see that it's, like you say, that it's not personal, that you're not a bad person, this is just a function of how your brain is wired for evolutionary purposes, then you can pause and work around it with some of these skills that you're talking about. Now, Dawson, when you were talking earlier about this example of the guy in the bookstore, he went and back and tapped on a really specific event in the past. Why is that important, that you go focus on specific events rather than just this anxiety or this depression or this fear?
It's absolutely crucial to find events and not just tap generally on this anxiety or this fear, because that's the way our anxiety was set up originally, was through a series of events. Things happened to us, and later on they may have combined to form a pattern of anxiety, but they didn't begin as anxiety. They began as events. So maybe you were, for example, 3 years old and you toddled into the kitchen and there were some cookies on the counter and you reached up to eat one and your mom slapped your hand and said, "No, those are for our guests later on." So just a little event, but it might have affected you. Or like the event with this guy's dad. And so after 10 of those events where you were criticized by a teacher for coloring outside the lines, where you were trying to make the school hockey team and you didn't make the team. So you've had 10 of these events, 12 of these events, 112 of these events, and so that shows up now as a pattern of anxiety. But it didn't begin that way. It began as a series of events. So with EFT, it's critical to drill down, find those events, work on those, and once you do, the beautiful thing about this, Annette, is once you do this, your whole general pattern can shift. And one of mine, for example, was anxiety. I used to have low-level anxiety all the time. And one day I was at a conference hearing one of the people there speaking about having low-level anxiety, and I realized that went away from me a few years back. I never noticed it going, but it did. So you realize that you've changed over time, and even those big patterns like low-level anxiety can shift if you just focus on enough of those events.
Now, one of the things that I notice when I'm teaching people EFT and facilitating it with them is as they start to chip away at some of those past events, it's like a whole bunch more line up and go me next, me next, me next. So it can be kind of overwhelming sometimes for the client. How many of those things do you have to tap on? Do you have to tap on every single one of them to make it go away, or how does that work?
Well, the fortunate thing is you don't. Think of the way that, for example, if you're in a relationship, there might be one habit your partner has that really annoys you, or one thing they say that sets you off. So initially, they could do that thing quite a bit, and it would annoy you mildly. Now, you're sensitized to that behavior, and they just do it a little bit, and you explode. Okay, so you become more and more and more sensitive to the annoying stimulus. And it used to annoy you mildly. Now they just begin talking about the thing that annoys you, and you explode. And that's been reinforced now in your neural network. That's how these neural shifts work against us. We become more and more sensitive to them. But the opposite phenomenon is also true. So if you desensitize yourself, then you can neutralize a whole bunch of events at the same time. For example, there was one woman I worked with in a workshop who had a pattern of procrastination, and that was her large pattern. And she had, of course, hundreds of events in her life where her procrastination had been apparent. And so the question is, do you have to then work on every single one of those hundreds of events? But it turned out that there were just three key ones. And one of them was when she was 7 years old, she was learning the piano, and there was a recital where all the students were going to play for all the parents. And her parents bought her a new dress for the recital. So she was in this new dress, 7 years old, and she was so proud of her dress, so excited to be performing. And she walked up on stage in her new dress, sat down at the piano, and completely forgot her music song. Her mind went blank. She couldn't think of it. Eventually, she burst into tears and ran off the stage, and that was the end of the event. So it was one event, but it was a highly triggering event to it with many components. So we tapped on that. We found one earlier event and one later event. We tapped on those three, and the whole energy of being a procrastinator went away. It shifted. So what happens is that when our brain realizes that one of these events is not really a threat to our survival in the here and now, it then generalizes this to all similar events. So you don't have to tap on 100 events or 200 events. Often tapping on 3 crucial ones is enough to bring the whole problem crashing down. All these similar memories like that aren't really a threat to survival either. And so that generalization effect, as you call it in EFT, means that if you tap on just a few of the bad events, the emotional energy around all of the similar events also goes away.
Wow. Powerful tool. And simple to learn, actually.
Simple to learn.
Now, you were mentioning the tapping into deep intimacy course. Can single people take it as well as couples, or do you have to drag somebody with you?
Yeah, we've had a lot of single people take it, and it's affected not only the way they think about relationships, think about themselves, but like, for example, we had one psychotherapist who was taking it, and she recently emailed us a long, beautiful testimonial and said that she's noticed her relationships with her family members changing, and family members who she's been in conflict with for decades, suddenly those relationships are shifted. So, yeah, it helps for single people. It helps for other relationships. And one thing about your work in that and looking for your soulmate, a lot of what we aspire to in a soulmate has to do with childhood deficits. And a lot of the choices we're making about who we want as our soulmate actually can be rooted in childhood deficits. So it's really important to work on those so that you're making a healthy choice. You could, your soulmate could just be a new incarnation of somebody from your past who you have unfinished business with, and you don't want to have that kind of a soulmate. That you might find that person, but will it be your highest good? May well not be. So you want to make sure you're looking for a soulmate based on what your highest good is, free of all that childhood conditioning. And so if you do EFT first, you can then see people around you and perceive them in a much, much healthier way. I know when I was looking for a relationship many years ago, I just learned EFT. There was one woman who I was crazy about. One day I thought, I'm just going to tap on all my associations with this woman. So I began to tap and just think about memories from my past and events from my past and every possible association. And I actually spent about 2 hours that day tapping. And when I next ran into this woman, I really talked to her in depth. I thought about the conversations I'd had with her. I talked to her again. And Annette, I realized I didn't actually like her.
Yeah.
But through my infatuation, I couldn't see that. But after I'd done the tapping, I realized, she'd make a terrible relationship partner. And I have to tell you that since this has been more than 10 years ago, but since then she's gone on to have has a series of disastrous relationships before that, and since then she's gone on to have more disastrous relationships. But if I hadn't tapped, I would have been infatuated and may have acted on that infatuation. So it really helps liberate us to see the world as it is, not through the lenses of our prior conditioning when we do this work.
Yeah, that's really good advice for those people who do the love at first sight thing and get married in 2 months. My guess is they're projecting all their unhealed parts of themselves onto the other person and not really taking a look at whether that person is a good potential candidate, as a long-term partner.
That's exactly right. And when you tap away all of those illusions, then you can make a much wiser choice, and be making a choice, again, from your highest good right now, not something that arises from your past wounding or past emotional deficits. Right.
That's why I decided to write my book, because I spent 24 years trying to help people fix marriages that probably never should have started it in the first place.
Yes, yeah.
I heard so many of those stories. So once people have gone through your course, how did they change? You said you got this really nice testimony about this woman with her family. What other kind of things are you seeing?
One of the really exciting things is to see long-term couples change. One couple came to a live version of the Tapping Deep Intimacy course, and they were in trouble. Well, they were more than in trouble. They decided to get divorced, and it was a funny circumstance. They said that actually what happened was that they signed up for the course. The course was in Hawaii. They made the plane reservations. They then booked their hotel rooms, and this was like maybe 4 or 5 months before the live event. And after about a month after making all the reservations, they just came to the conclusion that the marriage was over. That they said, well, we've already spent all this money on this course, on the plane reservations, on the hotel. We can't get a refund for the plane flight, even if we can, maybe for the hotel and the course. So we'll just turn this into a vacation, and we'll start the divorce when we get back. This will be our last vacation together, then we'll get divorced. Well, they showed up for one of the EFT sessions. He had a sex addiction, a pornography addiction. And if you read about what porn addictions do, they're just terrible for men. We can't go into it here, but it just produces all kinds of problems with the way your body works if you are into online porn. And so he had a porn addiction, impotence, and she had anger, she was like a volcano of anger. She was so mad. And so I worked with them. Afterwards, people said who watched them together, they're like newlyweds again. It just tapped away all this old childhood anger and hurt, and they totally reclaimed the love they'd had for each other before. So there are stories like that. Another couple have been married 40 years, and their relationship was just dead, stale, and full of decades of resentments. We tapped a lot of that away, and I've seen this couple now for 3 years since then. I've been seeing them at various other events, and they are so much kinder to each other. They're having fun. They're enjoying their relationship more. They're traveling. They're retired. They're just taking pleasure in each other rather than this bitter, resentful pattern they've been locked into for so many years before. So even people who have been married for a long time or have all kinds of problems have had huge breakthroughs as a result of learning these skills. It's never too late to go back and revise your relationship.
So really taking them from the brink of divorce back to, acting like a young married couple.
Yeah, that's why we call it, my wife and I call it hacking your hormones. And what happens is when you do this, you start to then have these big hormonal shifts. So you start to find, for example, and so a number of successful couples talk to us about this, sex becomes incredibly juicy and exciting. So even though you've been with the same partner for many, many, many years, when you learn to hack your hormones and do this kind of work, suddenly that partner, you're not looking at a younger person, you're not looking at a different person, you're incredibly turned on by your own husband or wife. It's so wonderful to have that gift of being incredibly attracted to the person you're with, even if it's been many, many years you've been together. So it's just one of the side effects of tapping away all those old, bad emotional wounds.
Well, that certainly goes against the myth that the chemistry and the sexuality in marriage dies over time, and you just have to sort of put up with it.
Yeah, that's the way it usually is because of that biological hormonal shift. But again, you can, by learning these skills, you reverse that, and you can rediscover that your sex life can be fantastic. And there are many, many accounts, a lot of research on seniors, people in their 80s with healthy sex lives, and they show that people can get a tremendous amount of pleasure and have very successful sex lives into their 80s and beyond.
Well, that is sell the workshop right there. So before we run out of time, I want to make sure I ask you how people can learn more about your work and how they can register for this upcoming workshop if they're interested.
Sure. Well, two things I'd mention. One is you can download the free EFT mini manual, which is how to do EFT. This is clinical EFT, the evidence-based form of EFT, because this is the form that's been proven in all of the research. And that you can download that for free at my website, DawsonGift.com. Just my name, my first name, Dawson, D-A-W-S-O-N, DawsonGift.com. That's where you're going to get the free EFT mini manual. And then to enroll for Tapping Deep Intimacy, and we're actually starting a class soon. So it's a 12-week online program, and it includes a year of coaching as well as the 12 weeks. And that is at tappingdeepintimacy.com. And then there's a button that says yes. You click on the yes button, and then that allows you to enroll for the course. And again, we're starting one of those courses. We usually do it twice a year, and one is starting soon. So if you enroll now, we'll be part of the next course that's happening.
Great. And I think you mentioned to me that you have a special gift for the listeners of this program related to that workshop.
Yes. We have a special discount coupon of $100 off the online course, and just use the discount coupon Annette, your name, A-N-N-E-T-T-E, Annette, and that'll give you $100 off. So when it comes to pay for the course, just put in that discount coupon Annette, and you'll get that discount off the course.
Great. Well, I appreciate that so much. And the one last comment we were talking about before the recording started about Susan Page's work, 8 Characteristics of Couples Who Thrive. We've been talking about the difficulties couples are having. It'd be nice to close with maybe some uplifting words about what helps people thrive.
Yes, and I include this work in the online course because Susan Page has really pioneered the whole idea of studying functional couples. John Gottman, of course, did this as well. And I once asked her, she wrote this book called The 8 Habits of Couples Who Thrive, which we include information from in the online course. And I said to her, Susan, if you were to boil down those 8 characteristics into just one word, what would the one word be? And she said, well, the first thing she said was, Dawson, that's an unreasonable request to boil down all this research into one word. But then she said, since you're challenging me, I'll do it. And the one word is goodwill. That couples who have learned these skills, couples who are doing well, they treat each other, they think and act with a sense of goodwill. And that's what I think I'd want to close on, that note, Annette,